He was 17, unarmed, standing on his own porch. The officers said he matched the description: tall, dark hoodie, looked suspicious. They didn't ask questions, didn't check IDs. They tackled him, slammed his face into concrete, blood on the welcome mat. And then they found out. He was not only innocent, he was legally untouchable. But by then, it was already too late. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The porch light flickered once, then went out completely. It had been doing that for weeks. Elijah didn't mind. He liked the dark. It made it easier to think. He was 17, quiet, and tall for his age. On paper, just another high school senior in Wilmington, Delaware. But in reality, he'd already outgrown the world around him. His mother called him an old man in a teenager's body. Most days, he wore hoodies with no logos and didn't say much. He didn't need to. At 7:43 p.m., he was standing on the front porch, earbuds in, waiting for DoorDash to deliver his mother's dinner. She worked double shifts at the clinic and hadn't had time to eat since dawn. Elijah didn't mind waiting. That was his place in the world, holding space, staying ready. What he didn't know was that someone else had made a phone call 5 minutes earlier. A white neighbor 2 houses down had seen a large male in a hoodie casing homes. That's all they had said. 2 officers in an unmarked SUV turned the corner. No sirens. No warning. Just the hum of power wrapped in tinted glass. Inside the car, Officer Riggins scanned the block. That him? He asked. His partner, Officer Kyle Mercer, nodded slowly. Description matches. Tall, hoodie, standing still. Looks like he's waiting on something. They didn't ask who lived there. They didn't check the address. They didn't even announce themselves as they pulled up fast, doors slamming open like gunshots. Hey, Riggins barked. Hands out of your pockets. Elijah turned. Confused. Removed one earbud. I live here, sir. I'm just... He didn't get to finish. Officer Mercer moved in first, grabbing his wrist and spinning him toward the porch rail. Elijah barely had time to react before he felt the knee hit his spine. The pain was sharp, blinding. His chin scraped the concrete. One of the earbuds popped out and skittered down the steps. Stop resisting, someone yelled. But Elijah wasn't moving. He couldn't. His face was pinned to the floor. His breath caught between the cold cement and the weight of knees and elbows. Across the street, porch lights came on. One by one, an older neighbor started to film. Inside the house, Elijah's mother, Carla, dropped a pot on the stove and ran to the door. That's my son. He lives here. What are you doing? They ignored her. Riggins pulled out his radio. Suspect in custody. Possible burglary attempt. Standing by for transport. Carla's voice cracked. He's 17, and you didn't even ask his name. Mercer stepped back slightly, panting. Ma'am, he fit the description. Elijah coughed once. Then again. Blood started to pool on the white welcome mat, the one his mom had picked out last fall, stitched with the word Grace. They hadn't even checked his ID yet. The cruiser smelled like dried sweat and plastic. Elijah's wrists were still bound. His hoodie was stained with blood, one sleeve torn where Mercer had twisted his arm too far. He sat in silence, jaw tight, staring at the cage between him and the front seat. Mercer chewed gum loudly. Riggins typed something into the onboard laptop. What's your name again? Riggins asked without turning around. Elijah didn't answer. Mercer smirked. Quiet type, huh? No problem. We'll figure it out at booking. Prints don't lie. The radio crackled. Riggins turned it down. Carla was still in the street. She had run after the car, but now she was back on her porch, phone in hand, breathless and shaking. She had already called the precinct, already demanded answers, but none were coming. At 8:12 p.m., the cruiser pulled into the back entrance of the Wilmington North holding facility. Concrete walls, barbed wire, buzzing halogen lights. Elijah had never seen this place from the inside. Until now. The door opened. Cold air hit his face. Out, Mercer said, tugging at his elbow. Elijah stepped out slowly. The sidewalk felt too far below his feet, like his body had started floating above the ground, detached from everything. Inside, the intake officer looked up as they entered. Name? Won't give it, Riggins said. The officer raised an eyebrow. No ID? None on him. The intake officer leaned forward, studying Elijah's face. Age? About 18, Mercer guessed. Big kid. Elijah's voice finally broke through the room. I'm 17. The room went still. The intake officer looked up sharply. You sure? Elijah nodded once. Got proof? He didn't. His wallet was in the house. Phone, too. All still sitting in the front hallway where he'd left them before going outside. "We'll verify through the system," Riggins said flatly. They took him to holding. A gray room with a metal bench and a single flickering bulb overhead. "Sit tight," someone said. Then the door clicked shut. For 27 minutes, Elijah sat alone. His hands still cuffed, blood drying against his cheek. Then the door opened again. A woman in a dark uniform stepped in with a clipboard. She was older, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. "You Marcus Green?" Elijah shook his head. "Then we've got a problem," she muttered. "You're not matching anyone in the system." "I told them," Elijah said, voice hoarse. "I live at 813 Cypress. My name is Elijah Brooks." She flipped pages, frowned, and left the room again. Another 10 minutes passed. Then a second officer entered. Different tone, different energy. "What school do you go to?" "East Landing High," Elijah said quietly. The officer nodded, pulled out a radio, and stepped aside. Elijah heard fragments. "No record. Juvenile database. Check with." Then, silence. And finally, footsteps. Louder this time. Heels. Carla. She came through the door like a storm barely held together by bones. "He's a minor." She snapped. "I have his birth certificate, school records, photo ID, everything." She shoved papers into the officer's chest. "You detained a child with no probable cause on his own porch." The officer swallowed hard, flipped through the documents. Then, quietly, "We'll get him released." But it wasn't that simple, because Elijah had already been processed as an unknown adult male, already tagged, already fingerprinted, and already entered incorrectly into a system that now refused to let go. It was supposed to be a routine correction. Input the right name, verify the documents, and let the kid go. But the system didn't want to forget. When Carla handed over Elijah's birth certificate and school ID, the desk officer frowned and typed it into the state records portal. Nothing came up. "Try again," Carla insisted. They did. Still nothing. His school enrollment wasn't syncing with the database. His birth record, though real and sealed by the state, returned a system error. "He's in the system," Carla said, her voice cracking. "He's got a driver's permit. He plays varsity basketball. He got a letter from Delaware State just last week." But none of it mattered. Not to the blinking screen. Not to the officers already thinking about their reports. "We'll need to run full biometric confirmation," someone said. Carla stared at him. "You mean like a criminal?" No one answered. In the holding room, Elijah was slumped against the cold wall. The cuffs had finally been removed, but his arms still throbbed. His face was swollen, lips split. The blood had dried into a rusty crust along his jawline. He hadn't said much since they took his name again. "You want water?" an officer asked, standing in the doorway. Elijah shook his head. The officer hesitated, then shut the door again. Down the hall, Officer Mercer filled out his use of force statement. He didn't mention the porch, didn't mention the address match. Instead, he wrote, "Suspect was evasive. Match Bolo description. Failed to comply. BLO. Be on the lookout." It was a vague alert issued earlier that day. Male suspect. Tall, possibly armed, seen in vicinity of Cypress Avenue. Dark hoodie. No name. No age. No crime. Just a shape and a fear. That was enough. When Riggins typed up the arrest report, he repeated the phrase, "fit the description," 3 times. Nothing more. At 9:47 p.m., a technician arrived. He carried a portable scanner and a folder of forms. "Juvenile ID not confirmed," he mumbled. "Need to validate via state database." He placed Elijah's hand on the scanner. One finger at a time. Red light blinking with each print. When he was done, he nodded once. "We'll know in about an hour." Carla was pacing in the hall. Her phone was at 7% battery. She had called her sister, Elijah's school, even a family friend at City Hall. No one could get through to anyone who mattered. "Why is this taking so long?" she asked the technician. "If there's no match, it defaults to secondary review. And if there is a match?" The technician paused. "Then it's someone else's identity." That thought landed like a hammer. Elijah, still inside, didn't know what was being said outside the door. But he could feel the shift. He could feel it in the way the air changed. The way the guards stopped making eye contact. The way time started stretching, slow and painful, like molasses poured through barbed wire. By 10:12 p.m., the results came back. One fingerprint, the right index, matched with a sealed juvenile record from another state. Baltimore. Name, Marlon Deshawn Reed. Age, 17. Outstanding warrant, None. Prior, petty vandalism, case dismissed. But here was the problem. That wasn't Elijah. He'd never been to Baltimore. He didn't even know anyone named Reed. But the system now had a partial match. And in the world of shared databases and lazy paperwork, a partial match was enough to ruin a night. Or a future. Carla watched as the officer behind the desk frowned. Something's not right, he muttered. No, she snapped. What's not right is that my son is still in custody 2 hours after you slammed him to the ground on his own porch. Ma'am, please calm down. Carla didn't calm down. She pressed both palms on the desk and said every word like a warning. I want him released. Now. But Elijah wasn't going anywhere. Because now he wasn't just a possible suspect. He was a system flag. By the time the sun came up, Elijah had been in custody for over 10 hours. No charges. No phone call. No paperwork with his name spelled correctly. Just a system-generated temporary hold based on a fingerprint that wasn't his. Somewhere in the facility's back office, 2 officers argued over what to do next. The mother says he's Elijah Brooks, no priors, clean record, said Officer Chong, scrolling through Carla's submitted documents again. But the scanner gave us Marlon Reed. Juvenile, Baltimore. Same age, similar build. I mean, look at the photos. That's not the same kid. Maybe it's an alias. Chang slammed the folder shut. You think a straight-A student with a 3.9 GPA and no criminal record created a fake identity in another state just for fun? Silence. No one liked being wrong. And no one liked admitting they arrested a minor based on nothing more than the color of his skin and the shape of his hoodie. Meanwhile, Elijah sat slumped in the corner of the holding cell. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot. His throat raw from the dryness. They still hadn't given him water. He didn't ask anymore. Carla had spent the night in the hallway, dozing upright in a hard plastic chair. Her phone battery died at 3:17 a.m. At 5 a.m., the precinct lights flickered on as the day's shift arrived. She stood up the moment she saw the captain. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. My son has been in custody since last night. There's no warrant, no charges, and now you're telling me he's someone else entirely? The captain, a pale, wide-shouldered man in his 50s, raised an eyebrow. What's his name? Elijah Brooks. 17 years old. He was arrested on our front porch. You have no right to hold him. The captain glanced at the file someone handed him. It says here he matches a previous juvenile record out of Baltimore. That's not him. You're looking for a Marlon Reed. My son's never even left Delaware. The captain flipped through the documents. Carla handed him school ID, birth certificate, medical card. Then he paused. This birth certificate, it's not digital. Carla blinked. It's a certified copy. From the state. Sealed. He nodded slowly. Still, it'll need to be verified. Carla stared at him, unblinking. Verified? We've had cases of forged documents before. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You think I forged my son's identity to protect him from? What? Being black? The captain didn't answer. Instead, he handed the file to another officer and muttered. Get confirmation from the state. Until then, keep him under hold. That was when Carla realized they weren't trying to solve anything. They were trying to protect themselves. Somewhere behind the desk, they knew they'd made a mistake. But admitting it meant consequences. Admitting it meant someone would have to answer for why a minor was tackled, cuffed, and held without cause. And no one wanted that. So they stalled. They delayed. They buried the truth under procedure. At 8:43 a.m., an email was sent to Baltimore's Juvenile Division. It sat unread in an inbox. At 9:15, Carla was told they were waiting on confirmation. At 9:44, a local reporter who had seen her post on Facebook showed up at the front desk. I heard about an underage boy being held without charges. Can I get a statement? The desk officer responded with the usual line. No comment on active cases. But something had shifted. Because now someone was watching. Inside the holding room, Elijah blinked slowly. His voice rasped when he finally spoke to the guard outside the door. Am I being charged? The guard didn't answer. Elijah leaned back against the wall. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry. And cold. And tired. But most of all, he was done being quiet. At exactly 10:02 a.m., a woman named Andrea Millen walked into the precinct's administrative wing. She carried a navy briefcase and wore a badge clipped to her belt that read Juvenile Legal Advocacy Program, JLAP. Carla had called her sister in Trenton around 6 a.m. Her sister called someone else. That someone else knew Andrea. And Andrea knew exactly what she was walking into. I'm here to see a minor held in custody under the name Elijah Brooks, she said calmly at the front desk. The officer behind the counter blinked. Do you have a relation to the detainee? I'm his legal representative. Here's my bar card. And here's a signed affidavit from his mother granting me immediate authority. She placed both documents flat on the counter, like a lawyer playing poker with nothing but winning hands. The officer hesitated. I'll need to get a supervisor. Please do. 10 minutes later, Andrea was standing outside the holding room. When the door opened, Elijah looked up. His eyes were hollow from fatigue, but they flickered with something else now, recognition. She smiled gently. You okay? He nodded once, then shook his head. I'm not Marlon Reed. I know, she said. And they know too. But they're trying to ride this out. Elijah studied her. Then, finally, he spoke. Can I tell you something? Off record? Andrea pulled out a small recorder and turned it off. Always. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. They're not going to fix this with emails. She raised an eyebrow. Go on. I interned at the Department of Youth Records in Dover last summer. It was part of a legal outreach thing through my school. They let me shadow the records compliance officer for a month. Helped with back-end data audits. Andrea froze. You? Worked on the record systems? He nodded. I know how their system flags work. And I know what they did wrong. Andrea's smile shifted. It wasn't surprised. It was impressed. What did they do? The fingerprint scanner flagged a partial match, one finger, right index, and automatically cross-referenced it with Maryland's older database. But the flag didn't go through a double match check. They were supposed to require at least 2-point confirmations for juveniles, especially across state lines. It's in the policy manual. Section 9.3.1. Andrea blinked. You read the manual? I helped write the update for it. The room went quiet. Then Andrea stood. I need to speak with your mother. And then the watch commander. There's a filing room in the admin wing, Elijah added quietly. If they haven't scrubbed it yet, there's a folder in the drawer marked Cross-State Fingerprint Conflicts. Green tab. Bottom right. Andrea looked at him like he'd just handed her a weapon. You remembered that? I filed it. 10 minutes later, she walked into the administrative corridor with Carla at her side. We're requesting immediate release of Elijah Brooks, age 17, Delaware resident, due to confirmed identity error and improper procedural processing under juvenile code. The desk sergeant frowned. Ma'am, you can't just walk in and out. Andrea held up a form. Judicial demand for release due to rights violation under state law. Already signed. Already timestamped. And unless you want a civil rights injunction by lunch, I suggest you take us to the file cabinet now. The silence in the room was seismic. No one moved. Until a nervous-looking clerk finally stood. This way, ma'am. They walked past half a dozen officers. Andrea stopped at a gray metal cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled it. The green tab was still there. Andrea flipped the file open, read one page, then two, and smiled. Because everything Elijah had said was true. And that meant the precinct was about to have a much bigger problem than just one angry mother. Captain Glenn Morales didn't like surprises, especially not ones that involved lawyers quoting juvenile code sections in front of his entire morning staff. You're telling me, he said slowly, arms crossed, that a high school intern somehow knows our intake protocols better than my officers? Andrea didn't blink. No, Captain. I'm telling you that your officers ignored your own protocols. And the intern just exposed it. Morales frowned. Behind him, Officer Chang handed over the file with the green tab. The room was quiet, except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. This report says a cross-state match requires dual confirmation, at least 2 fingerprint markers. But the system only flagged one? Correct, Andrea confirmed. And instead of escalating the discrepancy, they processed him like an adult suspect with no ID, which violates both Delaware juvenile law and your own intake rules. Morales flipped the page again, slower this time. Carla stood behind Andrea, arms tied across her chest. Her face was carved from fury, but her voice remained steady. My son sat in a concrete room for 13 hours because no one wanted to double-check a screen. Morales exhaled through his nose. This shouldn't have happened. But it did, Andrea replied coldly. And every minute he remains in custody now becomes additional liability. Morales looked up. What do you want? Immediate release. A formal apology. And your assurance that every officer involved is placed under review. Especially Officers Mercer and Riggins. He hesitated. I'll authorize the release. The rest will take time. Andrea leaned forward. Then I suggest you start the clock. At 11:27 a.m., Elijah stood in front of the release counter, hands trembling as the officer handed him a plastic bag with his things. Here, the officer muttered, avoiding eye contact. Phone, keys, wallet. Elijah took the bag silently. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Carla waited with open arms. He walked into her embrace like a man twice his age. I'm so sorry, baby, she whispered. Elijah shook his head. You didn't do anything wrong. Andrea stood off to the side, phone already in hand. I filed a request with the state board. They'll purge the fingerprint match within 24 hours. We're also logging a complaint with internal affairs. Carla looked at her. And the officers? That's next. Inside the precinct, Officer Mercer leaned against the break room sink, staring at his own reflection. He hadn't said a word since the release order came down. You okay, man? Officer Riggins asked from the doorway. Mercer's jaw twitched. That kid. He knew everything. He had it all memorized. So what? Mercer turned, voice tight. So I didn't just arrest the wrong guy. I arrested the one guy who could prove I was wrong. Riggins scoffed. It's over. He's gone. Let it go. But Mercer couldn't. Not because of what happened, but because of how Elijah had looked at him when they uncuffed him. Not with fear. Not even with anger. Just pity. And Mercer knew that kind of look didn't go away. It followed you. By 12:15 p.m., Elijah was home. He sat at the kitchen table in a clean hoodie, nursing a cup of tea with both hands. Carla paced nearby, on the phone with someone from the school district. Andrea sat across from him. You realize you can't talk publicly yet, she said. Not until we review liability exposure. Elijah nodded. I don't care about going public. Then what do you care about? He looked up. His voice was low. Steady. I want the report. Andrea frowned. What report? The one Mercer filed. His version. I want to read it. Why? Elijah looked down at his hands. Because I want to know how people like him tell stories about people like me. 3 days later, a manila envelope appeared in the Brooks family mailbox. No return address. Inside, a copy of the arrest report filed by Officer Kyle Mercer. Carla's hands shook as she pulled the pages out. Elijah took them gently from her, sat down at the dining table, and began to read. It started with a timestamp. 1949. Officer observed suspicious individual loitering near residential address. Then, suspect appeared evasive. Matched BOLO criteria. Refused verbal commands. Physical resistance encountered during detainment. Minimal force applied. Elijah read that sentence twice. Minimal force, he muttered. He slammed my face into concrete. Carla stood behind him, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. Andrea, who had come by that morning for coffee, leaned forward. That's the version they'll use in internal reviews, she said. If you hadn't spoken up, if I hadn't shown up, that would have been the only record. Elijah turned the page. There was no mention of the porch. No mention of Carla screaming. No mention of the hours spent in holding without charges. Just one line. Subject refused to identify himself. He looked up. He never asked. Andrea nodded slowly. This isn't about bad paperwork. It's about control. They filed what they needed to justify the result, not the truth. Carla took the folder and placed it under the toaster oven. What do we do with it? Elijah stood. We build our version. That afternoon, Elijah opened his laptop. He didn't post online. He didn't rant or accuse. Instead, he opened a blank Word document and began to type. Witness statement. The arrest of Elijah Brooks, age 17, Wilmington, Delaware. He listed times, street names, badge numbers, names overheard, even the make and color of the unmarked SUV. He added a paragraph about the porch light, how it flickered once, then died. It felt symbolic now, like a warning that the world outside didn't care how prepared you were. By the time he stopped typing, he had 7 pages. Clean. Factual. No emotion. Andrea read it the next day. This is stronger than a complaint, she said. This is testimony. Can it help? It can hurt them. Which, in this case, is the same thing. Meanwhile, inside Wilmington PD, the whispers had started. The file room clerk who gave Andrea the green-tabbed report? Suspended. Captain Morales? Under review for unauthorized release of internal records. The official explanation, chain of custody breach. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't about the folder. It was about who had accessed it, and why. Officer Mercer sat in his patrol car outside a Dunkin' on 5th Street. His shift had been quiet, but his phone buzzed every hour. "They're going to call you in," Riggins texted. "Just deny the fingerprint policy stuff. Say you followed protocol." Mercer didn't reply. He stared at the windshield wipers, unmoving, despite the drizzle on the glass. He wasn't worried about the review. He was worried about the kid. Because somewhere deep down, he knew Elijah wasn't finished. This wasn't just about one night. It was about the next boy and the next porch. Elijah never wanted to be seen as a victim. Not at school, not in court, and especially not online. So when Andrea offered to bring in a journalist, he declined. "I don't want attention," he said. "I want exposure." Quiet and surgical. She gave him a long look. "You're not a lawyer, Elijah." Yet, that night, he stayed up late reviewing Delaware's juvenile intake procedures, the same manual he had helped digitize last summer. He found the clause he remembered. No juvenile may be processed without visual verification of age and secondary biometric confirmation in cross-state cases involving incomplete match scores below 80%. His fingerprint match? 61%. He highlighted it, saved it, created a PDF titled Intake Breach, Brooks Case. Then he made a second folder. This one was called Others. It started small, one name, then another. He searched the court database. Juveniles processed after partial fingerprint matches. Dozens of cases. Some dismissed. Some buried. All of them tagged under the same intake officer. Sergeant Boone. The same desk officer who had refused to let Carla see Elijah that night. Elijah's fingers moved faster now. He wasn't angry. He was methodical. "This isn't just about me," he whispered. It was never just about him. The next morning, he walked into his school's guidance office. The counselor, Ms. Drayton, looked up in surprise. "Elijah? I thought you were still." "I'm fine," he said. "I need a meeting room for 20 minutes. And a projector." She blinked. "Are you doing a presentation?" He nodded. "Something like that." At 10:40 a.m., room 3C filled with 8 students, all black. All of them had been stopped, searched, or detained in the past year. Some for loitering. One for walking home after basketball. Elijah stood at the front of the room. No slides. No speech. Just his voice. "Raise your hand if you've ever been stopped by an officer near your house." Every hand went up. He nodded. "Now raise your hand if they asked for your name after they grabbed you." Most hands stayed up. He tapped the laptop and brought up the PDF. "What happened to me last week wasn't a mistake. It was a protocol failure. But they don't see it that way because it happens too often. To kids who don't know the rules. Or don't have anyone to call." The room was silent. "I want to start something," he said. A pause. Then a voice from the back. "Like what?" "A record." He looked up. Every stop. Every incident. Every time someone matches a description. If they're going to build a system to track us, we build one that watches them back. That afternoon, he uploaded a form to a blank website. porchlightproject.org. It was simple. Date. Time. Officer name. What was said. What wasn't. By 6 p.m., there were 6 entries. By midnight, 17. By the end of the week, over 40. No names. No faces. Just truth. And it scared them. Because Elijah wasn't on the porch anymore. He was inside the system. 3 days after the Porchlight project went live, the site was taken down. No warning. Just a white screen with a single line of text. "This page has been removed due to a terms of use violation." Elijah stared at the message in silence. Then, slowly, he smiled. Because he expected it. Because he had backups. Because truth doesn't disappear, it multiplies. That night, Carla received a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was male. Flat. Controlled. "You've made your point, Ms. Brooks. But it would be better for everyone if this ends here." Carla said nothing. The voice continued. "Your son is bright. He has a future. Let him protect it. Don't let him burn it for a grudge." Then silence. Carla didn't sleep that night. But Elijah did. Because he knew something they didn't. He wasn't burning anything. He was building. At 10:15 a.m. the next morning, Elijah entered the Wilmington Records Bureau alone. No lawyer. No press. Just a folder under his arm and his school ID in hand. He walked to the counter. "I'm here to file a public records request." The woman behind the glass looked up. "You're under 18. I'm requesting juvenile data. I qualify. Code 13-9, subsection C." She blinked. "What are you requesting?" He pulled out a printed list. Every juvenile intake in the past 2 years that resulted in temporary detainment longer than 6 hours without formal charges. with racial breakdown and officer badge number. The woman stared at him. Are you working with an attorney? No, ma'am. A reporter? He shook his head. Just me. She hesitated. These take time. Elijah smiled. I'll wait. 2 hours later, a supervisor came out. He didn't smile. Son, I think you should go home. This is an adult process. Complicated stuff. Not your fight. Elijah stood. My name is Elijah Brooks. I was held for 13 hours under a false identity because your intake system matched one fingerprint and never asked a second question. He paused. So with all due respect, sir, I am the fight. The supervisor folded his arms. You're not going to get what you want. I already have what I need. He tapped the folder. This is your protocol. This is your data policy. I read every page. If you deny my request, I'll file a procedural review request with the State Juvenile Oversight Council. They'll ask why a minor flagged as a victim of misprocessing is being denied statistical access protected under juvenile reform law. A long pause. Then, sit down. We'll get you a form. That night, the site came back online with a new server outside U.S. jurisdiction, donated by a black tech firm from Atlanta that found Elijah's story somehow. The homepage now had a title, Porchlight Project, because not every story gets a badge number. But what mattered most was the new feature. A single search bar. Above it, enter your zip code. See the stops. Know the patterns. And suddenly, neighborhoods that thought they were alone realized they weren't. From Philadelphia to Charlotte to Oakland, the porchlight wasn't flickering anymore. It was a spotlight. It was supposed to be a closed hearing. No cameras. No audience. Just a conference room inside the Juvenile Oversight Board building, 2 state officials, and a single empty chair on one side of the table. Elijah filled that chair. Andrea wasn't with him. Carla waited outside. This, he chose to do alone. A white-haired woman in a gray blazer looked up from her file. Mr. Brooks, you're here today to appeal for permanent removal of the fingerprint misidentification record, correct? Elijah nodded. That's part of it. The second official, a man with thick glasses, leaned forward. You're also requesting review of intake procedures for juvenile processing statewide? Elijah slid a folder across the table. Not requesting. Submitting. They exchanged glances. He continued. In that folder are 47 records of minors who were detained in Delaware under false or partial ID flags. 28 were held longer than 6 hours. 11 were strip searched. Only 2 ever filed formal complaints. The man raised an eyebrow. You conducted this research yourself? I built a database. Others filled it in. You're 17. That's why it matters. They paused. The woman spoke again. Your record, Elijah, will be sealed regardless. That's the law. Your name will not follow you. Elijah looked up. But it followed me that night. It followed me into a cell. It followed me home. A beat of silence. He leaned forward. You want to make this go away. I get that. But there are 2 systems in this country. One for people who fit the description, and one for people who write it. The man with glasses frowned. What is it you're asking for exactly? Elijah met his eyes. Make them ask the second question. Not just about me. About all of us. A pause. Then, flagged? Ask if he lives there. Matched? Ask how many points. Cuffed? Ask if he's a kid. Before the fingerprint, ask for the name. The woman closed the folder slowly. You're asking us to change state intake protocol. No, ma'am. I'm asking you to follow it. The decision didn't come that day, but something shifted. 2 weeks later, a memo leaked online. Juvenile Processing Policy Review Committee formed by Oversight Board. Effective immediately, Elijah didn't celebrate. He went back to school, back to the project, back to normal. But it wasn't the same normal. He wasn't the quiet kid on the porch anymore. He was the reason every intake officer in the state now had a copy of Procedure 9.3.1 taped to their wall. He was the reason 3 badge numbers had quietly disappeared from Wilmington's roster. He was the reason a boy named Chris in Dover had a mom who knew exactly what to say when they tried to take her son without asking a name. And still, no headlines. No viral story. Just porch lights. Turning on, one by one. On the night of his 18th birthday, Elijah walked outside alone. The porch light was working now. He stood under it for a long time. Not waiting. Just watching. The street was quiet. But his name was known. Not because of what they did to him, but because of what he did with it. The system hadn't saved him. It had failed him. But it didn't break him. And now, it would remember him. Forever. The end. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.